a film about a voyage across the Northeast Passage in the Russian Arctic on a Russian icebreaker named Kapitan Khlebnikov. The voyage started in the Russian Far East at Anadyr and crossed the Chukchi, East Siberian, Laptev, Kara, and Barents Sea before ending in Svalbard. Our voyage across the Northeast Passage and beyond covered 8,687 kilometers. Our trip started at the Anchorage Airfield, which is a hub for large cargo aircraft, including the giant Antonov 124. We flew from Anchorage, Alaska to Anadyr, Russia, across the Bering Sea.
Denali will be passing off the right side here for the next 10 minutes. About 15, 20 miles off our right side.
At the Anadyr airport, there were Russian military aircraft, including the giant Mi-26 helicopter, which is the largest and most powerful helicopter to have gone into series production. Beside the air terminal is a graveyard for Mi-8 helicopters. While waiting for the ferry ride to the Russian icebreaker Kapitan Khlebnikov, we watched an amazing scene of salmon fishing in the Anadyr River. Those catching fish included native fishermen, seals, and beluga whales. The water was alive with seals and whales chasing fish. Some fish were caught, while others jumped clear of the deadly jaws.
Oh, there goes somebody. Oh, look at somebody jumping through the water there.
The beluga facial expression appears to be smiling, thus appeals to people. The beluga whale or white whale are toothed whales that live in the Arctic. The beluga whales grow up to 5.5 meters long and weigh up to 1,600 kilograms.
There, the fish just jumped. Yeah, they all seem to be a foot or two long. So belugas have teeth?
They smile.
No, but do they have teeth? Otherwise I don't see how they can eat a fish if they don't have teeth.
Finally, the feeding frenzy show ended as we sailed seaward down the Anadyr River to get to water deep enough that the Kapitan Khlebnikov could safely enter. During our 2-hour ride out to the Kapitan Khlebnikov, we watched a Japanese samurai movie that was dubbed into Russian. Finally, the Kapitan Khlebnikov hove into view. Overall, we lost 5 sea days because of refueling delays. 2 days were lost at the start of the trip because of a failure to have the icebreaker refueled in Vladivostok for the start of our trip, and a further 3 days were lost because of a diversion to Murmansk where we waited 36 hours to be refueled. The 5 lost sea days resulted in an itinerary shortened by 15%, which detracted from the trip. Once aboard the icebreaker, I made the long climb up the stairs to the cabin on deck 8. My comfy cabin was right beside the captain's large cabin. After the lifeboat drill, the expedition leader explained the revised route based on 5 lost days of sailing. As this didn't sit well with us, we met with the expedition leader to ensure that the original itinerary was respected. This meeting helped ensure that indeed it was. A tour of the Kapitan Khlebnikov allowed we passengers to better see how this polar-class icebreaker works. The icebreaker has the expected features that allow the ship to operate in heavy ice. As well, she carries 2 Mi-2 helicopters. The ship has the Soviet Union coat of arms on her bow since she was ordered from Finland by the Soviet Union. She was delivered in 1981. A red polymer paint coats the 45mm thick ice skirt to reduce ice friction. Like most Russian icebreakers, the ship is designed for close-coupled towing operations. This is a method of towing vessels through polar ice by means of an icebreaker with a V-notch stern designed to receive and hold the bow of the vessel to be towed. The ship has an auxiliary bridge that is used when the icebreaker's main operation is at the stern. The heli deck can support the simultaneous operation of 2 Mi-2 sized helicopters. With the main rotor blades removed, 2 helicopters can be put into the hangar. The ship has a spacious bridge that normally has 2 or 3 officers and crew working on it. When moving through ice, the helmsman steers the ship with a small wheel to select a path with the least ice resistance. The steering gear, responding to the helmsman's movement of the wheel, moves the rudder to turn the ship. The engine ventilation doors provided welcome heat when standing outside on the deck. The engine control room provides a glimpse into late 1970s industrial controls. Amusingly, the ship's Russian crew uses southern United States music to enunciate engineering alarms.
Вот, в общем, мигает, да лампочка, что-то случилось. И вот одна музыка, потом вторая. Ну, это чисто уже местные, это так, для...
Going down to the engineering spaces, we had to wear ear defenders due to the deafening noise levels. Hence, the chief engineer used signs to point out the various pieces of equipment. The ship has 6 4,000 horsepower diesel engines that turn the generators to generate the electricity, which is rectified from alternating to direct current in order to power the direct current motors that turn the ship's 3 propeller shafts. The ship's power requirement determines the number of engines online. Hence, in heavy ice or when operating at top speed in open water, all 6 engines will be brought online, while when cruising at moderate speed, there may only be 3 engines online. The ship carries large replacement propeller blades which in an emergency can be installed at sea by ship's divers. Ironically, signs about the dangers of smoking were across the hall from the crew smoking area. Captain Vladimir Boldakov's experience in icebreaker operations served us well during the voyage. From Anadyr, we sailed through the Bering Sea to our first landing site of the voyage, on Yttygran Island. Once the Zodiacs were offloaded, we headed to the landing site known as Whalebone Alley. Whalebone Alley consists of a large number of carefully arranged whale skulls, whale bones, and stones, along with a considerable number of meat storage pits. Some scholars think that Whalebone Alley was used as a central shrine by a number of different villages dotted along the eastern Chukotka coast. However, the local Yupik peoples have a simpler explanation, namely that the island was simply a collective center for the flensing, butchery, and storage of whale meat. The massive whale bones make lovely frames for photographs. As this was the brief Arctic summer, the ground was full of many tiny, beautiful Arctic flowers. Returning to the ship, we sailed on to the planned landing at Cape Dezhnev and the largely Chukchi village of Ulan. Cape Dezhnev is the easternmost mainland point of Eurasia, so people want to visit it. A helicopter was sent ashore to see if safe helicopter landings could be made at Cape Dezhnev. The high winds at the ship meant that helicopter flights were deemed unsafe, so we sailed on from Cape Dezhnev without landing. Having failed to land at Cape Dezhnev, we then proceeded on to Ulan, a small Chukchi village of some 700 souls, where we hoped to experience the native ways of life in the Arctic. However, the fog and swells off Ulan did not augur well for a landing. Even though the Zodiacs were put into the water, there would be no landing due to some 100 meters of ice that was blocking the shoreline. After recovering the Zodiacs, we sailed on to Kolyuchin Island to hopefully visit its seabird cliffs and the ruins of a Soviet polar station that was abandoned in 1993. Kolyuchin Island is covered with tundra vegetation and is now uninhabited except for the wildlife, including thousands of nesting murres, puffins, kittiwakes, and other seabirds. Before we could board the Zodiacs, the drifting ice blocking the gangway had to be pushed clear.
Alrighty, let's go ashore in the midnight sun. Very nice.
Finally, at 1 a.m., we were off for a landing on Kolyuchin Island. The polar station was hastily abandoned, as can be seen from the pieces of Soviet-era film that were left on the beach. The abandonment of this and other polar stations was caused by the Soviet economic meltdown of the 1990s. The scattered old rusty barrels amongst the decaying buildings that have gone to rack and ruin were a reminder of those calamitous years for the entire Chukotka region. The busy seabird cliffs were but a stone's throw away from the station. Fortunately, the birds have no fear of man, so one can observe the birds from a very close distance. Seabird stars were the two species of puffins, namely the horned and the tufted puffin.
Yeah, it's different for sure.
Yeah. And there too.
Yep.
We returned to the ship at 3:30 in the morning, and soon we were on our way towards Wrangel Island. Leaving Kolyuchin Island, we sailed for Wrangel Island across the Chukchi Sea. In the Chukchi Sea, we encountered a herd of walrus packed on a couple of ice floes. Adult walruses are easy to recognize by their prominent tusks, whiskers, and size. Adult males can weigh more than 2,000 kilograms. Walruses live mostly in shallow waters and spend a significant amount of their lives on sea ice, so they can find mollusks to eat on the seabed. The tusks help them dig up the mollusks as well as being used to assist them to climb up onto the ice. In combat, the tusks serve as weapons. The pack ice also made polar bear sightings more probable, since the bears hunt seals from the ice. The ice pack started in the Chukchi Sea, increased in the East Siberian Sea, and was at its most dense in the Laptev Sea. After exiting the Laptev Sea at Velkitsky Strait, little ice was encountered. Encountering our first pack ice on the Chukchi Sea, it was fascinating to watch the icebreaker noisily make its way through the ice. Our first polar bear sighting was that of a bear in the far distance, swimming away from us and creating a wake like a small outboard motorboat.
Oh.
Yeah, that's right. Yep, you've got him. Perfect.
He's looking back at us
Yep.
now. There he goes. He just knocked over an ice.
So it's just swam around the ice. It's not going to climb out anytime soon, I don't think. Water, there's an object moving away from us, like a small boat. He's leaving a trail. You got him?
We sighted a mother walrus with her calf swimming amongst the ice floes. We reached Wrangel Island near midnight under ideal Arctic weather conditions. Unfortunately, rather than land given these favorable conditions, the decision was made to wait until morning, by which time the weather had turned for the worse and we were unable to land. As we were already 2 days behind schedule, this only added to the problem of making the planned landings throughout our voyage. There are 4 rangers who reside on the island year-round, and we stopped to pick up 2 of them to accompany us. We cruised along the west side of Wrangel Island, hoping for a break in the weather that would allow us to land. As the weather did not break, we turned back down south and retraced our route. The Russian government classifies Wrangel Island as a strict nature reserve, giving it the highest level of protection and excluding practically all human activity other than for scientific purposes. As we retraced our route south, we encountered a polar bear in the distance who did not seem to want much to do with our ship as he entered the water and swam away. The most interesting part of this bear sighting was the seal that seemed to be teasing the bear as he swam along. The bear kept looking back at the splashing seal, but realized that he had no chance of catching the seal. Finally, 14 hours after our arrival at Wrangel Island, the weather allowed us to land via helicopter on Cape Thomas. Our Russian government permit did not allow us to land using small boats, so we had to use helicopters for all the landings on Wrangel Island. In 1911, the Russian ice-breaking vessels Voyage and Timir on the hydrographic expedition of the Arctic Ocean arrived at Cape Thomas, and the sailors landed on the island and raised the national flag of Russia. Cape Thomas is a desolate landscape, with the highlight being the beautiful tiny Arctic flowers. At various times, Wrangel Island has been claimed by the British, the Americans, the Canadians, and the Russians. Its ownership was largely settled in 1916 when the Tsarist government declared the island belonged to the Russian Empire. The Soviet police operated 4 Gulag-style forced labor camps on Wrangel Island. The last to close was in 1988. After 3 hours ashore, we flew back to the ship in time for supper. The food on the ship was generally good, but more importantly, the well-traveled companions at mealtime were very interesting and friendly. From Cape Thomas, we sailed south to make a landing at an abandoned weather station at 9:30 p.m. Again, to comply with our permit, we landed via helicopter. With the 2 helicopters working in sync, piloted by 2 expert Russian pilots, landing the entire group was surprisingly rapid, even though only 8 passengers were transported in each helicopter. The abandoned weather station has been used by researchers studying polar bears to understand processes in polar bear populations and their drivers. Standing upright, polar bears tower over the tundra at up to 2.5 meters tall and can tip the scales at up to 725 kilograms. The preferred food of polar bears are seals that are hunted from the edge of the sea ice. However, when the sea ice disappears in the summer, the bears retreat to the land, living off their fat reserves for months at a time. It was interesting to walk along the shore and sink into the soft gravel beach. Once back at the ship, it was time to turn in for the night and wait to see what the morning would bring. From the weather station, we sailed south to Cape Blossom at the southwestern tip of Wrangel Island to make our final landing on the island. At 7 a.m. it was a beautiful Arctic day with sun and scattered clouds. We sailed past a mother polar bear with her cub, who took her leave of us and swam away.
Oh, there's a cub, eh? It's a mother and a cub.
Oh, got into the water.
Yes.
So hopefully it was a mother and cub, but very, very scared and running and swimming away.
We made our landing at Cape Blossom in bright sunlight at 10 a.m. On our flight inland, we flew over a muskox beside a stream. We landed high atop a ridge that afforded us an excellent view out over the countryside. From high atop the ridge, we could see the muskox far in the distance. The view of the inland hills was very pretty in the sunshine. The ridgetop had rivers of stone that were reminiscent of the famous stone runs on East Falkland Island. Surprisingly, there was a well-camouflaged Arctic spider living amidst the slate. After 3 hours in the glorious sunshine, it was time to return to the ship. Once back aboard, we left Wrangel Island on a dead calm sea with the water looking more like oil than water. From Wrangel Island, we sailed on to Ion Island. Not far from Wrangel Island, we encountered a polar bear walking along an ice floe. As the ocean was dead calm, the bear had a wonderful reflection. Given that it was a bright sunny day, this was our best opportunity to photograph a polar bear, so there was the constant sound of camera shutters clicking away. That evening, we encountered a mother with her 2.5-year-old cub searching the ice pack for a seal. The bears disappeared into the vast seascape and we continued on towards Ion Island. Because we had already lost 2 days at the start of the voyage and would lose 3 more days stopping at Murmansk, we had to make a midnight visit to Ion Island if we were to visit a Chukchi settlement. Unfortunately, because it was midnight, most of the people were in their houses. There was a beautiful golden sky near midnight as we arrived off Ion Island. Ion Island is a small settlement of some 440 people, mainly Chukchi. The principal activity is reindeer herding.
And we will shortly be disembarking. It's going to be about 45 minutes, half an hour until 45 minutes until customs is cleared. So just wait until your group is called. The group order will be 4, 3, 6.
We had a brief encounter with a seal on our trip ashore.
Right there.
The boats on the snow sleds were a reminder that this is an Arctic settlement, while the discarded vodka bottles highlighted the drinking problem in the town, due in part to considerable unemployment. Due to the permafrost, the town's utilities are located in utility corridors that also serve as walkways. We visited the town's small school, which has a curriculum targeted at the lifestyle of the Chukchi reindeer herders. When the parents are out on the land herding reindeer, some of the young students board in the school. The town's old coal-fired power plant provides electricity which heats the buildings, including some greenhouses. Despite being midnight, a family showed us around a Chukchi reindeer herder's tent. The matriarch was dressed in traditional garb. While we tourists wanted to see the town, the ship's crewmen went ashore to take advantage of the town's cell phone coverage, either to call loved ones back home or to access email on the internet. After 2.5 hours ashore, we returned to the ship and went to bed. From Ion Island, we sailed across the East Siberian Sea to Vilkitsky Island in the New Siberian Islands. Whilst crossing the East Siberian Sea, we encountered heavy ice that stopped the ship at times, forcing it to back up and charge forward to break through the ice. After a day and a half in transit, we arrived off Vilkitsky Island. The expedition leader didn't want to allow any landings on the island, but with pressure from a small group of us, we were able to land briefly on the island. The reason for his reluctance to allow landings was unclear, as our landing was straightforward in the event. Vilkitsky Island was discovered in 1913 during the Imperial Russian Arctic Ocean Hydrographic Expedition led by Boris Vilkitsky on the icebreakers Tamir and Vaigash.
You're on the wrong side of the boat? Why is that? Did you have to turn around? Seeing we're trying to kill time.
The island has colorful volcanic rock that is very pretty. We were only allowed briefly ashore, but whilst ashore, we could watch a mother walrus with her calf just a few feet from us.
Don't get upset with me. I got somebody running away, okay?
Should we line up for a photo? Yeah.
Yeah, take it. Go ahead.
Okay, guys, come.
From Vilkitsky Island, we skirted north around the main New Siberian islands to Belkovsky Island on their western side in the Laptev Sea. We again met with the expedition leader to ensure that he planned landings on Severnaya Zemlya and Novaya Zemlya. Without this pressure, the shortened voyage would have skipped these landings in favor of more time in Franz Josef Land. The most ice that we encountered was in the Laptev Sea, since it is a major source of Arctic ice due to its severe climate. The Laptev Sea is generally a shallow one, as we could see off Belkovsky Island. Belkovsky Island was discovered in 1808 by a Russian merchant named Belkov. The gloomy day added to the atmosphere formed by a forlorn hunter's hut and the femur bone from an extinct mammoth. Siberia is a source of mammoth remains. These giant elephants went extinct some 5,000 years ago due to some combination of climate change and human hunting. The Lena, one of the three great Siberian rivers that flow into the Arctic Ocean, empties into the Laptev Sea and carries trees that end up as driftwood on islands including Belkovsky Island. The relentless freeze-thaw cycle fractures rocks that break up when disturbed. The merit of having polar bear guards is shown by the large fresh polar bear tracks along the beach. Returning to the ship, the sea was calm, making for an easy transition from the Zodiac to the ship. It took us 2 days to cross the Laptev Sea from Belkovsky Island to the northern tip of the Taimyr Peninsula. The Laptev Sea is a major source of Arctic sea ice. In fact, it contributes more sea ice than the Barents Sea, Kara Sea, East Siberian Sea, and Chukchi Sea combined. Despite the extensive ice cover, there is continuous shipping on the Laptev Sea, in part to serve the major port in Tiksi and to move ships across the northern sea route. Shipping on the Laptev Sea is facilitated by the Russian fleet of icebreakers, including nuclear ones. In fact, later in the Kara Sea, we saw a convoy of ships heading to the Laptev Sea being led by a large nuclear-powered Russian icebreaker. It was impressive to see the large blocks of ice that occasionally passed through the propellers. We encountered extensive areas of pack ice whilst crossing the Laptev Sea, and at times the icebreaker had to work hard to break through the ice, so the number of engines brought online varied accordingly, from 3 to all 6. I never got tired of watching the big pieces of ice being broken up and pushed aside as the ship pushed westward. Whilst breaking heavy ice, the sound on board was akin to that of beating on the side of an empty 45-gallon drum, while the vibrations were strong enough to cause my computer screen to shake strongly. Fortunately, with a solid-state drive, there was no danger of a hard drive head crash due to the vibrations. Given the ice breaking, it was a good time to take a flight seeing trip to view the Kapitan Khlebnikov in action. When flight seeing, the Mi-2 helicopters only carried 6 passengers instead of the regular 8, so that everyone had a window seat. The seating in the helicopter was simply a matter of luck, so it was a bonus when I scored the co-pilot's seat for the flight seeing flight. Ear defenders were required during the helicopter flights due to the deafening engine noise. The Mi-2 is a small turbine-powered transport helicopter that was produced exclusively in Poland starting in 1965 and ending in 1998. The Kapitan Khlebnikov has a conventional icebreaker bow shape, namely a wedge-shaped design tapered into a sharp ice knife at the prow, designed to crack the ice as the ship's weight is pushed up onto the ice. We got an amazing view of ice breaking when the helicopter flew beneath the main deck in front of the ship. Helicopters flying low across the bow were an impressive sight from the bridge. It was very surprising to see a helicopter fly in front of the bridge as we sailed along, or to look down from the upper decks and see a helicopter flying below us. Both helicopters were flying during flight seeing, so we could also watch the other helicopter flying about in addition to seeing the icebreaker breaking ice. was amazing to see a helicopter landing on the helideck beside another one with both rotors turning. The Russian pilots were very skilled. The sightseeing stopped when we sighted polar bears so as not to disturb them. The mother and her cub were not disturbed by the ship, so we stayed and watched them swimming and then drying themselves off by rubbing on the ice. Occasionally they would rear up to better survey the ice surface. At times, the icebreaker's forward progress would be slowed and then stopped due to the strong ice resistance. Once stopped, the icebreaker would back up and then move forward again under full power to try and smash through the ice. The ship's bow print, marking its forward progress, was visible on the ice. We encountered several areas where the ice resistance caused the icebreaker to have to try twice before it was able to break on through. Occasionally we passed by icebergs in the pack ice. These came from glaciers ashore. At the western side of the Laptev Sea, we looked for a place to land on the Taimyr Peninsula, but the heavy ice pack was an issue. A patch of open water was spotted along the coast at Cape Papanin, and we made straight forward through the dense ice pack. When we entered the open patch of water and anchored, the leading edge of the ice pack was 2.6 kilometers from the ship. However, the wind started blowing onshore, so the ice pack slowly crept nearer. By the time we returned to the ship and recovered the Zodiacs, the leading edge of the ice pack was only 0.4 kilometers from the ship. We went ashore to Cape Papanin in Zodiacs despite the approaching ice pack. Cape Papanin was named after Ivan Papanin, a much decorated Soviet polar explorer and scientist who died in 1986. Our landing site was a desolate one with rocky terrain predominating. The tiny, pretty Arctic flowers, fungi, and colorful lichens were the highlights. With the ice pack closing in and threatening to block access to the ship by the Zodiacs, we returned to the ship and steamed away through the ice pack to Cape Chelyuskin. Cape Chelyuskin is the northernmost point of the Eurasian continent, and indeed of any continental mainland. It is situated at the tip of the Taimyr Peninsula. The cape was first reached in May 1742 by a land expedition led by Semyon Chelyuskin. There is a polar station at Cape Chelyuskin which we could have visited. However, because of our trip's 5 lost days, we did not have time to land, and so sailed across the ice-choked Vilkitsky Strait to Bolshevik Island of the Severnaya Zemlya group of islands.
Of course, we're well aware of the ice ahead of us in Vilkitsky Strait, and we've also recently received information about deteriorating weather forecast.
Surprisingly, Solnechnya Bay on the south of Bolshevik Island was ice-free, so we headed into it to make a Zodiac landing. There is a Russian polar station on the east side of Solnechnya Bay, but again we didn't have time to visit it due to our compressed itinerary. Bolshevik Island was discovered by Boris Vilkitsky in 1913. Once ashore, we went on a hike to see some of the countryside. Unfortunately, a couple of the passengers tripped and fell face first, picking up black eyes in the process. The plant life is mainly grasses and colorful mosses as the ground is very boggy. Summertime can be hard on polar bears as indicated by the grasses in the polar bear scat. The bears need ice to effectively hunt their favorite prey of seals. The unceasing freeze-thaw cycle had taken its toll on the rocks, which were split up and covered the hills. We walked up an old single-vehicle track to the top of a rocky hill to get a better view of the countryside, but then it was time to return to the ship. From Severnaya Zemlya, we sailed across the Kara Sea towards Novaya Zemlya. At 4 a.m. we had the opportunity to watch the Yamal, a Russian nuclear icebreaker with its uniquely painted bow, leading a convoy of 4 ships towards the Velkitsky Strait and the Laptev Sea beyond. The ships had convoy lights on their sterns to help the following ships see them in the gloom. There is a nautical saying that being at sea is risky. Being at sea in ice is twice as risky, while being at sea in a convoy with an icebreaker present is 3 times the risk. The Kara Sea was dead calm as the convoy sailed past us in the distance. In the morning we arrived off Novaya Zemlya and sailed around to its northwest side and passed by the rocks into Mac Bay to escape the heavy swells. Mac Bay and its eponymously named glacier at the head of the bay are named after a Norwegian captain named Mac, who accurately mapped the northern end of Novaya Zemlya in 1871. Because of our 5 lost days of sailing, we had to choose between making a landing on the island or taking a Zodiac cruise along the front of the glacier, where a polar bear was spotted. I opted for the landing. Novaya Zemlya was a sensitive military area during the Cold War years and was one of 2 major nuclear test sites used by the USSR. On the 30th of October 1961, the most powerful nuclear weapon ever detonated, called the Tsar bomb, was set off over the island with a yield of 50 megatons. Once ashore, we slogged up a high ridge of broken rock to get a view out over Mac Bay. The misty mountains towering over the ridge were enchanting, and we had a wonderful view out over the bay. The ridgetop hosted little auks which flitted about the rocks. Returning back down to the sea, Jerome and myself went for a polar dip in the frigid waters. Jerome was much more comfortable in the water, which I found very cold, as in fact it was below 0 degrees, since it was cold-soaked seawater.
So Thomas, can you introduce this perhaps?
Today we are looking at Jerome. Jerome is an aquatic animal who likes to swim in cold polar waters.
Right. He will attempt to swim here in Novaya Zemlya. Good luck. And here we have the second nominee of the day, Thomas, preparing for his endeavor. Good luck, Thomas. Yes! Whoa! Yes, yes. It's easy. Well done, Thomas. And that was it. A very quick endeavor.
Once out of the frigid water, the air temperature felt positively tropical as we dressed up prior to returning to the ship. Glacier ice was brought back to the bar, and for the next couple of days we could have ancient glacier ice in our drinks. At Novaya Zemlya, our group had champagne to celebrate the completion of our passage through the Northeast Passage. From Novaya Zemlya, we sailed north to visit the islands of Franz Josef Land, which are only 900 kilometers from the North Pole. It was a rough crossing to Franz Josef Land, an archipelago which was first reported by the Austro-Hungarian North Pole Expedition of 1873. Our first stop in Franz Josef Land was at Cape Tegetthof on the south coast of Hall Island. Cape Tegetthof was the site of a hut built by Walter Wellman's North Pole Expedition in 1898-1899. We didn't land on the Cape because there was a mother polar bear with her 2 cubs wandering about the ruin of Wellman's camp. After standing offshore and observing the polar bears, we cruised into Rough Bay, past a pair of impressive stone sentinels. Across Rough Bay, we could see the glaciers on Hall Island as we cruised past the icebergs floating about the bay. Returning to the ship, we sailed north into Negri Strait that separates Hall Island from McClintock Island. The outstanding feature of Negri Strait is the large number of glaciers that line the strait on both sides, making for a wonderful passage. As the weather was closing in, we were fortunate to be able to make a flight-seeing trip out over the glaciers. The immense size of the glaciers was really evident when one saw how small the helicopters appeared in comparison. The glacier rose up some 30 meters from the ocean's surface. The surface of the glacier was crisscrossed by deep crevasses. After our enervating flight-seeing flight, we chowed down at a barbecue in the Negri Strait. However, the frigid temperature did not lend itself to a pleasant barbecue experience. Exiting Negri Strait, we sailed north across Markham Sound to Champ Island. It was a beautiful day to visit this mysterious island. What makes Champ Island mysterious are the spherical stones of varying size that litter its surface. A flock of kittiwakes lined up on an iceberg to greet us. We had to slog up a muddy slope to reach the site of the stone balls.
Is this where the little balls are born?
Nobody knows with absolute certainty how these spherical stones got here. A likely theory is that these stone balls are concretions, i.e. masses of minerals formed when a cementing sedimentary material carried by water comes into contact with an organic nucleus like a leaf, twig, shell, or maybe a fossil. The resulting chemical reaction forms the ball in layers, often as a perfect sphere. The stone balls are very impressive. Unfortunately, many of the balls were taken away in the past, either to sell or as souvenirs. Excepting for their hardness, some of the stone balls would have made good footballs. We left the river of balls and hiked over to the glacier to walk up it. Traversing the glacier was made more difficult by the rivulets that course down its surface. We took a photo on the glacier of the friendly group of fellow travelers that I met on board the ship. These rivulets carve deep into the ice surface, and at times there's a surge of water that flows down them, like a slalom skier going downhill. Leaving the cold of the glacier, it was time for another polar dip in the frigid water. This time, Joao Paulo joined Jerome and myself in taking the frigid plunge.
All right, so here we are on Franz Josef Land, on Champ, otherwise known as Camp Island, and we are waiting to observe three wise men who are about to swim in the cold Arctic waters. Joao, is this your first time swimming in the...
No, I do it all the time.
Oh, okay.
Every island I've been.
It's just like the beaches in Portugal. Actually, it's not very cold like that. It's just like the Atlantic side of Portugal. North Beach.
The committee here is dying in anticipation, yes?
This is the main judge. I'm not taking my shirt.
And here we have the first contestant. Yes.
I'm going. Whoa! Yummy.
Does the t-shirt help?
Congratulations. Congratulations, Jeroen. And a quick but efficient swim from Thomas.
After the polar dip, we dressed back up in what seemed like warm equatorial air before returning to the ship. The lighting as we returned to the ship made the Kapitan Khlebnikov particularly photogenic. From Champ Island, we sailed southwest to Takea Bay on Hooker Island. Takea Bay is the site of a historic Russian polar station that was established in 1929 and was visited by the giant Graf Zeppelin airship in 1931. The station was largely abandoned in 1963. As we took our Zodiac past the polar station, the old buildings provided a flashback to an era that ended over half a century ago. There is the danger posed by roaming polar bears, so polar bear guards were stationed on the station's perimeter. The old seaplane hangar was filled with snow that lingers throughout the summer due to the shade. Outside the seaplane hangar was a rusty old crawler tractor that still had gauges unaffected by the passage of time. Pieces of old Soviet-era celluloid films were scattered about. Standing on the shore, we could watch the mirrors from Rubini Rock fly past. The Franz Josef Land archipelago is part of the Russian Arctic National Park. Some of the former polar station buildings have been fixed up for summertime use by the Russian Arctic National Park rangers. Dog kennels line either side of what is known as Dog Street. The name Takea, which is Russian for calm, was given to the bay by the Russian polar explorer Grigory Sedov, whose expedition wintered here in 1913-1914. Above the station is an old broken windmill that once helped to power it. An Orthodox cross marks the astronomical point of Sedov's expedition. At the Takea Bay post office, one can buy souvenirs and send postcards.
До свидания!
After several hours of wandering about the polar station, it was time to say goodbye to the friendly station staff and return to our ship. Sailing from the station, we crossed the bay to see the seabird cliffs on Rubini Rock before sailing south to Northbrook Island. Rubini Rock is the largest colony of seabirds in Franz Josef Land. The rock was named in 1895 by the expedition of Frederick Jackson in honor of the legendary Italian virtuoso tenor Giovanni Rubini. Perhaps the cries of the seabird reminded him of opera. The seabirds take full advantage of the horizontal basalt columns for nesting. Leaving Rubini Rock, we continued southwards towards Northbrook Island, but soon encountered a bowhead whale. The whale was preparing for a deep dive and soon disappeared. Unfortunately, it was very foggy when we arrived off Northbrook Island. Despite the fog, we went ashore to see a walrus hollow, but it was difficult to clearly see the walrus. However, suddenly a marvelous thing happened. The fog lifted, so we could clearly see not only the walrus, but also the background glaciers. The walrus were stacked together like cordwood at the hollow, and they jostled one another, climbed over top of one another, and poked each other with their long tusks. It was fascinating to watch the activity at the hollow. We had to stay back a couple of hundred meters from the hollow, but then a number of curious walrus arrived on the beach where we were standing, so we got a very good close-up view of them. Soon it was time to leave the fascinating scene, and we waded back across the river to the landing site. With the fog now lifted, the impressive ice cliffs on Northbrook Island were now clearly visible. Leaving Northbrook Island, we sailed south from Franz Josef Land to Murmansk for refueling and clearance out of Russia. After an uneventful day-and-a-half crossing of the Barents Sea, we arrived off the mouth of the Murmansk Fjord and were greeted by white-beaked dolphins. We picked up a pilot for the trip down the fjord to Murmansk. We saw 4 tugs approaching line astern, and soon it became clear their purpose was to escort a Delta IV class nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine that was sailing up the fjord towards the Barents Sea. Seeing the 3 sailors on the sail reminded us of the opening scene from the movie Hunt for Red October. With 16 submarine-launched ballistic missiles, each carrying 7 nuclear warheads, the Delta IV class submarine still forms the backbone of the Russian strategic submarine fleet. The Northern Fleet base at Severomorsk was busy, and we got to see a number of impressive ships, including the battle cruiser Peter the Great and a Borei-class ballistic submarine, which is the replacement for the Delta IV class submarine. At 252 meters in length, the battlecruiser Peter the Great is the largest surface combatant warship in the world. The aircraft carrier Admiral Kuznetsov, the flagship of the Russian Navy, was riding at anchor. She became fully operational in 1995 and can carry a mix of 40 fixed and rotary wing aircraft. We passed by the Rosatomflot fleet of nuclear-powered icebreakers, including those both in service and decommissioned ones. This is the home port of the nuclear icebreaker Yamel that we had seen earlier in the Kara Sea, leading a convoy towards the Laptev Sea. We were berthed at a coal dock for 36 hours awaiting refueling. Even though the port of Murmansk is located above the Arctic Circle, it is ice-free year-round. This, together with its location close to Europe, means that much coal is shipped through the port. It was fascinating to watch the equipment unloading the coal trains while the cranes loaded the coal onto ships. From our berth, we could see Alyosha, or the defenders of the Soviet Arctic Memorial, commemorating the Great Patriotic War. From our berth, we walked in through the port to see the city and its many interesting sights, including the memorial to the submarine Kursk disaster. We were fortunate to be in the city during Airborne Forces Day, and we were welcomed to the activities, which included an impressive military demonstration by the Northern Fleet's naval infantry.
Товарищи десантники, братья, пацаны, моча. Сюда, война не мамка, она беда. Вот отвоюем, закатим пир, сынок родится, и будет мир. Мы тянем лямку туда-сюда, война не мамка, она беда. И поры идут в моря, гордые моряки, и парусный фрегат, и ФДК.
The friendly people helped us to pose holding an AKM assault rifle. The day's activities included field stripping of AKMs by young people who were not experienced and therefore slow, but also by young men who had served in the military and were very fast. Finally, after a 36-hour delay, the ship was refueled, and so Russian border control officials came on board to clear us out of the country. We then sailed for our final destination of Longy Bien in Svalbard. Our 2-day-long crossing to Svalbard was uneventful. We sailed up Isefjorden to Longyearbyen, past the Russian coal mining town of Barentsburg. However, we arrived so late that our connections were jeopardized. As we left the Kapitan Khlebnikov for the final time, we could see the Swedish icebreaker named Odin riding at anchor. Overall, our voyage across the Northeast Passage and beyond covered some 7,800 kilometers and took us to some very unique locations.
Take me somewhere nice, to some tired island in your heart called paradise.